Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome, Instagram. This is take two from my bedroom about the link between the sacred feminine and pleasure that not many people talk about. Really, I haven't seen anybody talking about this. So I tried to record this, and the dogs were going crazy. So we've moved locations to the bedroom where hopefully it'll be much quieter. So if you're tuning in on Facebook, on Instagram, or even inside of the podcast, thank you so much for joining. And I want to talk about the link between pleasure, sensuality, sexuality, and the sacred feminine. So if you don't know me or don't know my story very well, I'm going to give you just a little brief synopsis because I think that this is really this overlapping that I see that I think is so important, that I think, quite frankly, is vital for female leaders right now. So I grew up going to Catholic school. I went through 10 years of Catholic school. Now, the thing for you to understand is my family, my parents were not very religious at all. Okay, so they were not religious. They it's not like I went home and we were reading the Bible or anything like that. But 10 years of Catholic school meant that all of the classes that I took in school were really like anchored in Catholicism and Catholic doctrine. So even history was from the perspective of the Catholic Church, right? Whether that be wanting to see them as victorious or even wanting to see them as the victim, right? So 10 years of Catholic school and all of that programming seeping in from such a young age, plus being a woman inside of the patriarchy. Now, the patriarchy is the system, the constructed system in society that says men and the masculine are more valuable, more important, the gold standard compared to women and the feminine. What we have to understand for the majority of the Western world, which is where the majority of my clients are, the laws that were created in the majority of the Western world, the customs, the societal expectations were rooted in Catholicism, right? Because in the 300s, the Roman Empire decides that Christianity is going to become the religion of the empire. Now, Christianity at that time, from the 300s to whenever the Protestant Reformation was, which I believe is like the 1500s, maybe. I'm a little blurry on the dates at the moment. Christianity meant Catholicism, like the Roman Church was Rome was the head of the church, right? So, and then even after the Protestant Reformation, and you have all of these branches of Christianity breaking off, like they're still, those branches are still going and colonizing countries and exerting power and sending missionaries to save the people for Jesus and all of that, right? So there's a lot of Judeo-Christian religious programming steeped in the patriarchy. Like the patriarchy and Judeo-Christian misogyny like are going hand in hand, right? So after high school, at some point, I was like, you know what? I don't believe in Catholicism. I don't believe in anything. I don't even believe that there is a God. Like, I don't believe in anything. Nothing. I'm like 18, 19, 20. I'm like, nah, whatever. I don't believe in anything. Then, when I was 25, my dad passed away. And I knew that I didn't believe in Catholicism or Catholic doctrine, but I wanted something spiritual, right? Like I wanted something spiritually. And I found myself in Mama Gina's School of Womanly Arts, which, if you don't know Regina's work, it's all about pleasure and sensuality and feminine energy. And when I showed up to the class, I started to learn about goddesses, but from the perspective of like why the goddesses were worshipped, why a goddess would have been worshipped, compared to how I learned about goddesses growing up in Catholic school, which was they were pagans, heathens, and we had to come in and teach them the right way to be. Okay. So I started to learn about how outside of the last 2,000 years, humanity worshipped women, worshipped the goddess. Like all ancient archaeology, anytime they're finding like statues of deities, it's women, it's the female body. And I was learning about pleasure and desires and sensuality and all of these things that felt so foreign to me. Yet it felt like my soul was so dehydrated and was finally taking a drink of water, right? So I was hooked, hook, line, and sinker. And so there I am, 25, learning about pleasure and sensuality and desire and like sexual energy and all of these things that, again, as a good little Catholic girl, I never learned about, never heard about, definitely never talked about, definitely didn't explore. And the more that I wanted to lean into pleasure, sensuality, desire, the more I had to confront religious programming. Makes sense, right? Like what was stopping me from feeling more pleasure in my body was the fear that I would go to hell and the shame of being a woman because being like Eve, cursed us all. Like that bullshit, right? So as I'm healing religious trauma and deconditioning, like pulling apart this religious programming, right? Being like, looking at it and being like, that doesn't make sense. Like, that's bullshit. No, thank you. That, no, definitely not believing that. There started to grow this void for me spiritually. This void of, I don't believe in what I was taught growing up in terms of religion. And quite frankly, I don't even believe that the divine is male. So where the F does that leave me? Because there is a yearning and a longing for spirituality, but like where does that leave me? And so then I really started to learn about Mary Magdalene, sacred sexual priestesses, and for me the sacred sexual priestess became this, so like this deeply healing archetype, because again, growing up Catholic, I learned that sex, and specifically as a woman, my sexuality was sinful. So to realize that not only were sacred sexual priestesses a thing, but that they were revered for their sexuality, but that their sexuality was seen as sacred, and that people, when in whatever kind of connection with them, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, they saw it as being in that kind of intimate connection with a goddess. It was like, ah, so not only is everything I learned about my body and sensuality wrong, but it's not just neutral, it's sacred. It was like so healing for me, right? And so there I was starting to research and investigate and learn about ancient feminine rituals and how women would, follow a moon cycle. And I was like learning more about and really coming into acceptance even more of my own menstrual cycle and things like this, right? And it was always weaving in and out with pleasure, turn on, sensuality, sexuality, right? It was always weaving in and out. And to me, what I have found by and large is that in a lot of spiritual communities that talk about the goddess, that talk about the sacred feminine, there still is a lot of shadow around sexuality. And in fact, it's interesting because I did a speaker series last year where I promoted it to a lot of places. I don't have my glasses on. So I can't read the comments. Sorry. I promoted it to a lot of communities that were like labeled as spiritual feminine communities or like priestessing communities. And over them, whatever it was since I've done it, like 8 months, anytime I talk about the courtesan or sacred sexual priestess, I get the most unsubscribes and the most unsubscribes from women in those communities. And I did a post today on Facebook where I'm like, the irony for me is all of these women are so interested in quote unquote Aphrodite, but so triggered by the concept of a sacred sexual priestess. Like, who do you think her priestesses were? Who do you think our priestesses were, right? And so for me, when I do rituals, whether they be subconscious identity shifting rituals, whether they be um somatic rituals, whether they be new moon or full moon rituals, I find myself always incorporating pleasure, always incorporating a sense of sensuality, or almost always incorporating sexual energy or sex magic. Because to me, these two go hand in hand. They are not separate. They're not. And I think that it makes sense because we have our sensuality as women has been so vilified. It has been the thing that we have been taught and told that it's the most dangerous. It will cause us harm, that if harm comes to us, that we deserved it because of our sensuality. And none of that is true, right? And to me, like taking a step back, and maybe this is just like my sixth line in human design or being a manifester or just all of the learnings that I've done over the last decade, it's like, why would we be told that this one thing is so dangerous if it was not the key to our power, right? Why would the patriarchy spend so much time and effort trying to control this one piece of us, like really pushing propaganda about how awful and dangerous it is and how it makes you immoral and how you're going to go to hell and all of this shit, if that was not the key to our power? Right? Because if they take that key away, if they teach us that that key is like a hot potato and we shouldn't touch it, right? Like if they, I heard a quote once and it's like, I don't even know who said the original quote, but I heard it via somebody else. And it was basically like, how do you cage a goddess? You teach her to build the cage around herself. And that's what the patriarchy and religion has done with our sensuality and sexuality. So for me, um, yeah, exactly. It makes me livid and it makes me so fired up to do this work because it's so beautiful to see so many women who are into astrology now and like claiming being a witch, claiming being a priestess. I love it. And when I started doing this work a decade ago, there was none of that. Like it was still seen as so out there, so weird, so other to say I'm a witch or to talk about like spells or rituals or new moon things. Like it was still seen as pretty, you know. And now it's becoming more and more mainstream, which is so beautiful and so incredible. And I really feel like this next frontier for the majority of you leaders who consider yourself witches, priestesses, spiritual leaders, healers, is this melding of sexuality, sensuality, pleasure work with the sacred feminine. And to me, it's at this intersection where we get to be so spiritually grounded and turned on, right? So embodied in our power and connected, recognizing the divinity within ourselves as a woman and connecting to the divine, whether however you see that, right? And that to me is this leading edge of feminine leadership. And so this is why I created the Red Temple, because again, I've been studying and living, breathing, eating, embodying, learning, taking all the certifications for the last decade. And the majority of the stuff that I've learned around the sacred feminine and goddesses has been self taught because there wasn't anything. And then when communities started popping up around spiritual woman, this, spiritual feminine, this, blah, 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 I would go into them and two things would happen. One, they would skew heavy Judeo Christianity, which I have a problem with. Why did you name it the Red Temple? Yes. So the color red is the color of the sacred of the divine feminine. And the Red Temple is because it was this ode to the concept and the idea that um centuries ago, millennia ago, women would gather together within a tribe when they were bleeding, typically at the same time, or to mark a life transition of one of the women. They would gather in the tent and be in sisterhood, be in circle, be in ritual together. And it really came from watching the movie The Red Tent. And I was like, I am yearning for a space where the spiritual part of me is nourished and the pleasure pussy queen part of me is also nourished, right? So when I would join spiritual feminine communities, one of two things would happen. One, they skewed heavy Judeo-Christian and definitely turn on pleasure was like not allowed. And I cannot tell you how many times I was slut shamed just for talking about pleasure. Or two, it would be more about goddesses, but again, the pleasure and turn on piece was like not welcome, not allowed, or not that it wasn't allowed, it just wasn't embraced. And then I would go into spaces that were more focused on pleasure, but I found them to be more tantric based. I don't have a problem with tantra, but that is not my spiritual path, right? My lineage is all European, right? So what I am drawn to is the sacred practices, the sacred feminine practices that occurred pre Roman Catholic Church in Italy, in Ireland, in, Europe in general. And I'm really drawn to Mary Magdalene. I'm not drawn to the spiritual path of Tantra. I don't want to learn the sutras. And so being in tantric spaces also very much felt like I was play acting in those spaces. So I'm like, this is not my spiritual path. And it doesn't feel authentic for me. Right. So it was like, I was in this space where I'm like, I can join these places and get like a little nibble, but I'm not being satiated spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and definitely not with my pleasure, right? So I created the Red Temple to be that space. So we meet every month for new moon rituals, which include pleasure practices, include somatic practices. This is not just about meditation, getting up and out of the body. And you get like a monthly pleasure practice. Um, Thank you so much. You get a monthly pleasure practice calendar. We have guest experts coming in. I teach a quarterly course in there, and it ranges from topics around like success, money. One of my favorite courses that's already in there is called The Holy Whore, which is about reclaiming and healing like your sexuality and healing sexual shame oppressed by religion. Um, and we have guest experts coming in every month next year to teach mini courses. There's like astrology forecasts and tarot readings, and there's so much happening in 2024 inside of the Red Temple. And so what I've done is I've opened 5 spots for anyone who wants to join at the pay in full price. You'll also get 3 private mentorship and customized ritual calls with me, which means that over the course of the year, you and I will connect 3 times and we will dive into whatever's coming up for you. And I will personalize a ritual to take you through so that you are anchoring into your sacred feminine and your turn on. And you get an additional month inside of the program, right? So it's a 12-month. You join for the year, but you get December. You get to join the second that you sign up. And the link is in my bio. It's all over Facebook. It's in the show notes here for the podcast. But to me, I think for a while I was like, where does all of this sacred feminine work fit into quote unquote being the magnetic woman, right? Because a lot of what I was teaching at first was like polarity work. And it was like getting a guy's attention or like flirting, which I still very much like. My flirting course is one of my best sellers and by far one of the best pieces of content I've ever created. And it was like, okay, where does the spirituality piece fit in? But what I realized is it's always been there, right? In order for you to lean into pleasure and sensuality and embodying your sexiness, you're going to have to confront the conditioning, either religious or societal, which is steeped in the religious conditioning. And once you peel that away, it's like, well, what's left? And that's where this sacred feminine piece comes in. So there are 5 spots for this incredible bonus for the Red Temple, and I would love, love, love if you decided to join. Shoot me a message if you have any questions at all. Here's the thing. The bonus expires tonight at midnight. So you have like 7 hours left, unfortunately or fortunately. And yeah. So I am going to be talking so much more about this connection, this overlay, all of it. If you have any questions, let me know. You can go to themagneticwoman.com/temple to join us. And again, when you join at the annual pay in full membership, you get this incredible bonus. And yeah, I'll be excited to talk more with you. See you soon.